What's going on, WBSE? The Whiskey Network is pleased to welcome the first in a series of 6 live events with filmmakers from the Water of Life and also with special guests. I'm Chad Cadden. Joining me as always, Bill Varnell, and our editor-in-chief for the Whiskey Network magazine, Mindy Schwartz. Tonight's guest, we got film director Greg Schwartz, producer Alphonse the Fonz Palima, and brand ambassador for Bruichladdich Brands, Jason Cousins. Gentlemen, welcome and cheers.
Launcha.
Cheers.
Launcha.
So if you guys are ready, let's get right into this. I'd like to start off with a metaphor about Bruichladdich from the film Water of Life. Jim McEwen was sitting in a restaurant with whiskey writer David Bloom, and as he looked across the water at the closed Bruichladdich distillery, he said, "Someday I want to make whiskey there." Bruichladdich is a Cinderella that never got to the ball. Can you tell our viewers what Jim meant by that comment?
Well, I have a 4-year-old, so I read Cinderella, a couple times a week. So I'm very familiar with the metaphor, and I think it's a pretty apt one. As you see in the film, Bruichladdich had just fallen into disrepair. It's opened and closed 4 times since it opened in 1881. It never really kind of got the upgrade that Cinderella later got. Right? It was always just kind of dirty, run down, but capable of absolute greatness. And Jim saw that. Jim saw that in some of the old whiskeys that he grew up around. In Bruichladdich Village. He just saw this potential in this just kind of decrepit, rundown distillery, and really wanted to kind of bring it to where he thought it deserved to be, just to elevate that distillery.
Nice. Greg or Alphonse, you guys want to add anything?
I think Jason said it really well. And, one of the things that was in the long term, I think it's interesting that Bruichladdich benefited today from being neglected for so long, because when we spoke with Alan Logan, he told us that had this distillery constantly been in favor with the company, they would have upgraded equipment here and there and changed things here and there. But as a result, we just did an event a couple of weeks ago, and someone asked me, "Is the old Victorian equipment at Bruichladdich on display so you can still see it when you go there?" And I said, "No, it's being used. It's like the only major change they've ever made is that the grist mill used to be powered by a donkey that walked in a circle." And everything else is still vintage Victorian era equipment, and it's amazing that they it's a huge testament to the craftsmanship. And I think Jim recognized that and always felt that was a really special place that no one ever saw the beauty in until 2000.
Mindy?
I don't know if Greg or Alphonse wants to take this one, but how did y'all settle on spotlighting Bruichladdich for the film? We get a cursory glance at several other distilleries, but the main focus is Bruichladdich. Why is that?
Well, we didn't set out to. That's the truth is we picked a handful of distilleries that we thought had a really interesting story, and then we wanted to tell those in a sort of even kind of way. And it was a combination of 2 things. One was we quickly realized that Bruichladdich story was as amazing as the whiskey was. We loved the whiskey and we loved the story behind it. And also Bruichladdich was very, very generous with their time. And that made it a lot easier. We featured Rachel Berry in the film, and we were thrilled to be able to get to talk to her, but we had 2 hours with Rachel Berry. We had 2 weeks at Bruichladdich. And so, but the main driver of it really came after the fact when we were editing the film, and we were like, "Oh, this story is just as dramatic as the whiskey is." Even if you don't drink whiskey, the story is really interesting.
Great. I just want to, if anybody's just joining us, we have the Water of Life producer, Alphonse, director, Greg Schwartz, and Jason Cousins from the Bruichladdich Brand Ambassador with Chad and myself and Mindy. So my question is, it's not really a question. Well, yeah, I guess it is. So tell us what happened to the distillery in the early 80s, the distilleries, causing them to close their doors.
In the early 80s?
Yes.
Well, Bruichladdich They were distilling up until 1990, and then in 90 they were distilling off and on for a little bit. From 90 to 94, there was some distillation happening, but it was 94 was the hard stop when it was mothballed. At that time, it was owned by White Mackay, which is part of the Jim Beam family. And you know, as Greg shows in the film, Mark Renier, Simon Coughlin, the two wine merchants and independent bottlers, had been traveling in Islay and recognized Bruichladdich as something that they kind of wanted to get involved with. And so they petitioned Jim Beam and White Mackay every year for, I heard about 10 years is what the story goes, asked them to sell it. And it was only in 2000 when it was actually bought by Mark and Simon. But 94 to 2000, there was no distillation going on. There was some stuff just distilling, here and there for bulk distillate. But at the end of the day, the whiskey business, I think Ardbegg's closed 5 times for a very well-known distillery on Islay. It's a game of as you know, of distilling and forecasting what that demand is going to be like in the future. Now with Bruichladdich, you had a couple world wars, you had prohibition, you had a lot of stuff going in there that really just kind of didn't really let them get into any kind of sustainable business. So they ended up closing 4 times from 1881 up until the relaunch in 2000.
So if you'll allow me, I'm going to follow up on that question with the next question. And this was a curious part that I picked out of the film. And that is, the question is, was the fact that blends were the backbone of the industry back then a factor leading up to the demise of the industry? And that's commonly referred to as dad's drink in the film. So was that what led to the demise more than anything else?
Well,
it's a hard one to. What's that?
No, I was gonna talk on an industry-wide level, but go ahead, Jason. I can.
No, go ahead.
I mean, in Scotland they call it the whiskey lock, which was in the early 80s, and the whiskey lake, and basically when whiskey started losing popularity, none of the distilleries slowed down production. They just kept churning it out. And then all of a sudden when it collapsed, no one would buy it. And that's what really started leading to the closures of all of them. So yeah, it was like there was no demand for blends anymore. And that was the selling to blenders was like the firewall that would protect them from the bad times. But they had produced so much whiskey and no one wanted it that there was nowhere to put it. They were basically giving the stuff away. And that was, I was just going to talk on the industry wide level, Jason, not about Bruichladdich specifically, because I know Bruichladdich kind of limped through that for a while until it fully shut down later.
Yeah, and it was only shut down because Jim Beam also owned Jura, which was spread across the water. So to them, they didn't need a second island distillery. So Bruichladdich was, as they deemed it, surplus to requirements. So they shuttered it.
This is the screen that Mark got to see, the gate when he was on tour.
We're just seeing thumbnails, Franz.
Oh,
no, I said the new visitors plant closed.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I thought that I had selected the whole thing.
And that happened industry wide, and it finally started changing in the around 98. Now we just see your desktop fonts.
Yeah, all right.
A lot of technical issues today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Mindy?
Yeah.
So enter Jim McEwen bringing the distillery back to life after being closed for 6 years. What are some of the things that he focused on when reviving the brand?
I mean, for Jim, the biggest thing was looking at Bruichladdich as being really just kind of a microcosm of Islay. He to him, he's a native Illick. That's what you're called if you're from Islay. You're an Illick. He grew up there. He just saw this island in decline. The economics of it. This basically the only business or the lifeblood of the island is whiskey and whiskey tourism. And if you're not working in either of those, you're basically just working in small independent businesses there. So a lot of the young people were leaving and not coming back because there was less and less jobs in whiskey. They didn't really want to work in whiskey. And whiskey itself was largely becoming more and more automated. You know, you had these small distilleries being bought up by larger conglomerates that would centralize different, means of productions, doing central aging and outside of Glasgow for all the distilleries. So that means that all those jobs in the warehouses and the bottling hall on Isle were then being moved out to Glasgow. So you used to have about 13,000 people living in Islay about 100 years back. You have about 3,500 people living there now. So Bruichladdich, again, with that Cinderella metaphor, was just kind of beat up, run down. And that was to Jim, not only really kind of reflection of Islay itself, but the whiskey industry and how he saw that whiskey was being made. Was it being made the way that he thought it should be, which was the old-fashioned way, by hand, by sight, by smell, focusing on ingredients, on taste, also on innovation. It just seemed very kind of cookie cutter, I think, to him, and he was a little burnt out on that. So really, we talk a lot about it being a labor of love, and it was for Jim, and it was for Simon, it was for Mark. This was his kind of one shot and to really, make his mark and make a whiskey that was 100% his own.
We got a question from our viewers, Christina Nelson. She wanted to know, is there a way to date the earlier bottles to find out who the head distiller was at the time of bottling?
With Bruichladdich, there's signatures on the bottle. This says Adam Hannett, who's the head distiller now.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll say Adam, head distiller. Really, there's only been 2 people signing bottles. And interestingly enough, Jim is known as a master distiller, but his signature, it still says head distiller on the Bruichladdich bottles.
Okay.
There's one bottle Bruichladdich released when Jim was retiring that I actually am lucky enough to own. I don't have it near me, or I would show it to you. It's one of the Port Charlotte series where both of them signed it. And I'm not going to butcher the name of the whiskey because it's written in Gaelic, but it's what it translates to as the dutiful student. And it was a symbolic whiskey of Jim handing over to Adam.
The PC12, right?
PC12, yeah.
Right. Yeah, mine's in the other room too.
I can't believe you guys don't have your PC12 at arm's length.
There's a funny story when Alphonse, when we went to, if you've seen the film, we go to Australia to follow Jim there. And when we were leaving Australia, Alphonse and I were in the duty free at the Brisbane airport. And the guys, they had 2 bottles of the PC12 left. And Alphonse and I bought them. And the guy at the counter said to us, he said, the guy who made this whiskey came through here yesterday. And we didn't tell him that that we were that's why we were there in the first place. But we bought the last 2 off the shelves at the Brisbane airport. So don't go looking for it there.
I see in chat that the question was actually about older bottles of Bruichladdich. Before Jim, Bruichladdich was never really about the distiller. It was a plant, and it was just pumping out distillate for blends, as we were talking about earlier. So there was really nothing signed. There was no kind of celebrity involved with the brand at all. So nothing was signed or really noted as to who distilled what.
I've got a picture here, if I could try that again, or at least of the bottles that we've got. Do you see?
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, you can see the double signature line.
That is a rich color in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, down there.
Wow.
And I do have the Black Art 4 here that has Jim's signature on it. So I don't have there's not a lot of Jim's signature whiskeys left. I mean, not that they're in private hands.
I'm sure.
Jim was definitely a intriguing fellow to follow along in the Water of Life film. I really enjoyed watching that. I just rewatched it probably about 2 hours ago, prepping for the live event tonight. And very interesting guy. I actually want to do a little bit more reading on him now. That was just a statement, not a question.
So
he just published his autobiography.
Adding
did he? Nice.
for any of our viewers that want to get a ticket to see the film, there's a link in our pinned post that they can get a ticket to see the film. So anyway, if you just joined us, make sure you check out our pinned post in WBSE and you'll learn a little bit more about that. So back to the Adam Hannett, when he joined and Alan Logan joined, what were their contributions in the early days when they got to the distillery?
Well, Alan was a painter, did some construction work. That was his start, and then Adam was working in the gift shop as a tour director. And Adam, he kind of took a very similar route as I worked a lot in restaurants back in the day, and you know, the best people in the restaurants are the ones that start at the bottom and work their way up in every position. You know, they might start as a busser, and then a server, and then maybe you know, a bartender, bar manager, GM. Those people that know the inner workings inside and out, and they end up being the best employees. That was essentially Adam's journey. He started working, you know, in the gift shop, talking about Bruichladdich, learned how to talk about the distillery, learned how to, you know, just kind of overview of all the different areas, the departments, you know, as he would lead people through the tours. But then started working in the warehouse, then started working in the distillery, and he's worked in every position, basically just kind of been brought up through the ranks. And then, as we saw on that PC-12, was essentially, you know, Jim's protege, as Jim was looking to hand over the reins in 2015. And Alan took a very similar route as well, but Alan's much more practical, business-minded. Jim would joke that it takes two people to do his job, and that's essentially what he did. He broke it down into, you know, Adam on the distilling side, and then Alan on the managerial side. But Alan, again, a very similar route as Adam did. But Alan tends to be a bit more private, so I haven't really heard about every job that he's had at the distillery yet.
So that sort of goes back to how Jim McEwen got his start. Didn't he get his start as the cooper?
Yep.
Cooper's apprentice.
Yeah, when he was a teenager.
Interesting. That's very interesting that the distilleries start off their employees wherever they're needed. And these guys, if they've got the passion, they work their way up through the ranks to become master distiller or master blender or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Experience teaches all. I was at an event with Adam a few weeks back, and somebody asked him, what credentials or what kind of schooling have you gone to for distilling? And he said, absolutely none. Absolutely none at all. I have no credentials, no certificates, nothing at all. Just learned it on the job. And honestly, I think there's a good argument for that being probably the best form of education out there.
You know, Jim told me a story the other day. It's not in the film because he just told me this the other day about one of the things he would do to train Adam and Alan. And I thought it was fascinating. So I'll quickly tell you if that's okay. He said he would have them go pull cask samples, and then and meet him in the tasting room when he was working on a new whiskey he was going to create, and he would make 6, even on his own. He would make 6 varieties of it, tweaks, 6 different, you know, slight tweaks, and then when they weren't there, he would choose which was the right one. But then he would hide that and then have them come in, and they had to tell him which was the right one, and whether they chose the one he chose or not, he made them make them defend their choice. And even if they chose the one he had chosen, he would pretend that wasn't the one he had chosen, just to put them on their heels and, you know, make them. And he said what he noticed it did is it made them pay attention even when they were pulling cask samples. Like they couldn't just kind of go look for cask number 7418. They had to actually look and see, oh, okay, this is the ex-bourbon cask. This is 8 years old. This is, you know, and so, you know, that was sort of one of the techniques, I guess, if you will, that he used.
Okay, that actually leads into my next question.
Nice.
Excuse me. No, yeah. And the answers. We know that, you know, at the closed distillery there was a lot of casks just sitting there unattended, dating back to the early '60s, 1964, I believe I got from the film. Jim is quoted in the movie saying, "There's no bad whiskey, just bad casks." What did he do to remedy that with the tons of barrels that were just sitting there filled with whiskey?
Yeah, I mean that was the lion's share of the price for the distillery. Was not actually the rundown buildings, but it was the stock that was there. It was about 5,000 casks of whiskey from the last count that I was that was given. But yeah, to Jim's point, he said there's no such thing as bad whiskey, just bad casks. He said he's got a lot of tired barrels there, and he just started recasking, tasting, releasing what he could, what he thought was good and interesting as it was. But you know, it was a distillery that was reopened with 50 private investors on a shoestring budget, so they needed to start generating revenue quickly. So he started, you know, looking for the barrels, the most interesting barrels that he had through Mark and Simon, the two wine merchants, that would make a very quick and impactful flavor, and started releasing whiskeys from there. But a majority of that whiskey was recast, and then of course there were a few barrels that were fine as they were, and were just kind of left. And those, I think, were probably what made their way into a couple editions of Black Art. So the Black Art legacy, that's all legacy stock. That's all whiskey from, you know, the 90s. You see on the bottle from those from 1994, those last 4 years of distillation, and that was all, you know, part of the stock that they purchased.
Last week we did an event with Jim's daughter, Lynn McEwen, is now the global marketing manager.
One of my favorite people.
And last week we did an event with her, and she said that there are 600 casks left from that original 5,000 that they bought. There's still 600 left they haven't done anything with yet.
Don't believe a word she says. I keep getting updates and numbers and this and that, and it's a very creative place, and there's a lot. It comes from Jim, who's a natural storyteller, and everything's with a wink and a nod, you know. But yeah, take it all with a grain of salt. They might have another 5 casks back that they'll find next year after they tell you they're all gone.
Yeah.
Some of them are hidden underground.
Well, there's a lot of whiskey there. I think we've got about six new warehouses going up. We've got 70,000 casks on the island, which I would, compared to the other distilleries on there, we've got the largest stocks, because as I mentioned before, a lot of the actual aging is done off Isla. But there's a lot of whiskey there. So I would imagine some barrels will get lost or forgotten about.
So Jason, one of our staff writer, Mark Pruitt, just posed a question. What's 2022 look like for Bruichladdich? Is there anything coming out special that you want to scream from the mountaintop or release here in WBSC?
Well, we have the new series of Octomore coming out, which is every year I want to scream about the new Octomores. That's probably my favorite thing coming out of Bruichladdich. For those, if you're aware, the Octomore is the world's most heavily peated whiskey. It's a series of whiskeys that really just kind of try to push the boundaries on what we know of when we think of peat or we think of age. I mean, the last 2 editions ago, we released an Octomore that was 3 years old, which is the very minimum you need to be in terms of age to be called Scotch. So again, really just kind of pushing the boundaries and what people think, you know, it takes to make good whiskey. So new Octomore is coming out. Very excited about that. And this is the first year that the 0.2 edition, which is normally reserved for travel retail, for for airports, duty-free shops, that's the first time the 0.2 is going to be available to us here in the States. So that's super cool. We have a new Port Charlotte coming out, a Pauillac cask. That should be coming out within the next couple weeks, if a month at the latest. The cask strength Port Charlottes we did before, the OLC, the Oloroso cask. We did the MRC. Those are phenomenal whiskeys, all cask strength, great stuff. So that's coming. We have updated vintages for our Isla Barley and Port Charlotte lines. Those are vintages of Isla grown grains, barley into the whiskeys. On top of that, we got a new Black Art 9 coming out, and this is the one that they tell me assures me that this year this is the very last of the legacy stock, like the last 2 before were the last of legacy stock. So the 9th edition of Black Art's coming out. On top of that, I'm trying to think of anything else coming. New Bear Barley. We do our 6-row style of grains. What's that?
Will that one be coming to the U.S., the new Black Arts?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm not listing anything you can't get. I wouldn't do that to you. This is all coming.
So is the Bear Barley going to be a regular annual release now?
Yes. The Bear Barley was only, was again, duty-free. but it really wasn't doing well there. So they wanted to kind of push it out to markets where there's a little bit more interested consumers, people that want to try something different. Bear Barley is one of the most interesting whiskeys I've ever had because it has that very kind of more malic acid, green apple as opposed to citrus, very grainy. It's really a superb whiskey, very light. But it just took off here in the States, so it's going to be an annual release, released domestically.
I love it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
It's
a great summer
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious to try that super peaty one, the Octomore. I'm not the biggest peat fan, but over this last year and a half, I've really gravitated to a lot of different scotches, so I'm kind of open-minded about the peat. But that one, I ain't gonna lie, it kind of scares the shit out of me. Because
it shouldn't.
168 parts per million of peat when the standard is 40 parts per million.
We've hit 309. We've got well.
Oh wow!
All right, here's an exclusive. We've got one that's beat that coming out. So there's a new record on PPM coming out.
That's
insane. Hot diggity.
Chad, I did a tasting earlier today, and I had a Port Charlotte. In the tasting we were in, we did a Port Charlotte and an Octomore. And to me, the Port Charlotte, which I loved, which actually was my favorite of the whole tasting, is it comes across as actually smokier than the Octomore. Okay. It's almost like the Octomore kind of goes through the window and back around again. I'm not going to say it's not smoky. I'm just saying the smoke is more right up front in the Port Charlottes than in the. I love the Octomores.
Okay. I'm very open to trying peated whiskeys a lot more than I was a year and a half, 2 years ago. I keep a bottle of Ardbeg in the house because every now and again, I'm a bourbon drinker primarily, but when my palate's off, I like taking a nice little pour of that because it just revitalizes it. I don't know what kind of witchcraft is going on in the peat, but it works.
I think a lot of
really well.
Yeah, and that's really the secret of it. You got to do it well. I mean, there's a lot of peated whiskeys that I think are pretty heavy-handed or tend to be heavy-handed, kind of one-dimensional in a way. That just kind of hit you with that peat flavor. But Octomore is just it's about harmony. It's about bringing these kind of off-the-chart elements. The ABV at 60+%, the youth of the whiskey at 3 to 5 years. And that that ppm, the phenolic level off the charts, is taking these things, just kind of condensing them in a way where they keep the power, but they come into harmony with each other. It's hard to describe. It's really just more of an experiential whiskey, really. So I would be very surprised if you found it too peaty, because I think a lot of people will, to Greg's point, Port Charlotte, to me, and to a lot of people that taste it, tastes peatier than Octomore. But Octomore is just the layers of flavor, and a finish just goes on for forever.
So,
but yeah, very much experiential whiskey.
To that end, Jason, we have a question from one of our viewers, Scott Seymour. What do you think about the popularity of the trend of barrel finishing, and do you think it's just a fad, or does it have room to grow?
I think there's probably a lot more to it, and we're going to see more and more of it in other distilleries. For us. As I was saying before, finishing, and I'm, finishing barrels, or they call it acing, alternate cask influence or whatnot. That's part and parcel in who we are. I think that was one of the innovations that Jim brought to the table and really kind of turned some heads when he started releasing these whiskeys. And again, with the good whiskey with the bad casks, one way you can turn those around pretty quickly is bringing in some fantastic wine barrels and then throwing it in there for a little bit just to kind of add depth of flavor to it and really kind of soften the any kind of harshness left over from the distillate. So we've got about 230 different types of wood now in the warehouses. We're experimenting more. I don't think that's slowing down at all on our end. That's probably something that'll never stop. In terms of the industry as a whole, I think a lot of distilleries are just getting started with that. So I think we'll see more and more of it. Greg, and Alphonse, what are your impressions of that, or your feelings on that? Trend, or fad, or something that's here to stay?
I think, well, at least for the time being, I think certainly it's here to stay, because I think there's more and more of it going on all the time. I didn't prepare this. I just happen to have the right props near me. You know, Teeling just released this Black Pitts, which is a peated Irish whiskey, and it's finished in a Sauternes cask. So, you know, like they're starting to get into this thing where they're peating it, they're finishing it in wine casks. You know, it seems to be kind of going all over different kinds of whiskeys all over the world now. So I say more, you know, I think it's a great way to bring out different flavors than people have ever experienced before.
If you talk to the folks at Bruichladdich about it, they don't really think of it as finishing. They actually try to avoid the term finishing it. They call it, like I said, the acing, that alternate cask exploration, because they see it as part of the production, not like you're taking something that's been completed and then finishing it and just adding, like, you know, a few weeks or months or whatever in another cask. It's part of the whole recipe. It's part of the whole production of having these other barrels involved. So it's not really a finish so much as it's just a step, really.
Yeah.
I can't see it going anywhere. I think it's bringing so much more to the table, whether it's Scotch, Irish whiskeys, or Kentucky bourbons. Everybody's doing it. And I think it's, you know, if it's done properly, which I do think it does great with Scotch, more so than bourbon, but I've had some bourbons recently that have been finished and they're doing it great now. The first few times I tried it, I'm like, this is a little off to me. But, you know, once again, I'm always liking to try more things. And I think it's wide open now.
So once again, if you're just joining us, we're here with the filmmakers, The Water of Life. And if you haven't seen the film, please look at the pinned post on the top of WBSC page. You'll get an opportunity to watch the film. So I want to turn the next question to Mindy. Mindy, you have something there you want to ask?
Yeah, we're going to go back all the way to the early 2000s with this one. Jim had some groundbreaking ideas that really pushed the envelope when he first started distilling those first barrels when Bruichladdich reopened. Can you expound on some of those early expressions and tell us what made them so unique?
Well, one thing I think really kind of turned some heads was the ABV that he was releasing at. You know, typically you expect 40% ABV. You know, Jim said he did a lot of experimentation. Now, first of all, if you're going to do a non-chill filtered whiskey, you can't go below 46 really without it starting to haze up in the glass. So anything that's non-chill filtered pretty much starts at 46 and above. So 46 was his spot where he wanted to release the whiskeys at, because he felt with a higher ABV, more of a backbone to the whiskey, it'll tend to kind of boost those maltier, sweeter notes. So another kind of element of that innovation was actually talking about barley with whiskey. You know, no one really talks about the grains or really the raw ingredients here. The focus is on the casks with this idea that 60 to 80% of your flavors coming from the barrel. Jim wanted to flip that script a little bit and actually focus on the ingredients of the grains. So that was innovative right there. In order to talk about or really to taste the flavor of the barley in a whiskey, you have to back off on the age. You have to back off on the casking, because the longer whiskey sits in the barrel, you know, the more it's going to taste like the barrel. So releasing whiskeys that were 5 years old, 6 years old, was something that I think a lot of people were surprised at, and really, again, turned some heads. But then boosting that ABV to 46 up to 50% 50%, and actually releasing a whiskey that didn't sip like a 100 proof whiskey, that actually just had, you know, depth of flavor to it, and really kind of a full-bodied, rounded, mouth-feeling experience. That was surprising to a lot of people, that you could release a 100 proof whiskey that just didn't drink like a 100 proof whiskey. So those would be the top ones. Right off the top of my head, I would come up with the focus on the grains, the ABV, and then of course we talked earlier about the casking. You know, throwing whiskey in barrels that people hadn't really experimented with before. You know, looking at Madeira, port, Sauternes cask we were talking about, reef salts, French fortified wine, Tempranillo barrels. You know, whatever casks he had that he could get from Mark or from Simon, you know, he'd experiment with it. I think a lot of distilleries were shying away from experimentation. And why, if you've got a business model that's just cranking out millions of liters of product and people are there to buy it, you know, you spend your money on marketing. You don't need to spend your money on innovating, because people are buying your product. You're good. For Jim, no one knew Bruichladdich, and no one knew Bruichladdich the way that he knew Bruichladdich. and no one really knew what it was capable of. And so he wanted to kind of really just make a mark and make a big one. You know, as you see Jim in the film, he's a very larger than life character, and he wanted a whiskey that tasted that sipped the same way.
Now you just touched on a topic that is very much in the news lately, and I know Greg knows exactly where I'm going with this. So it's either a hot or a cold topic, and there's a lot of chatter about chill filtration or non-chill filtration. So can you talk about Bruichladdich approach to that?
Well, the simplest way to talk about it would be the Victorian age equipment. You know, they weren't chill filtering in the late 19th century. So we're not set up to do it. That, and it's not the style of whiskey that we're looking to make. If you are focusing, the argument that I would make, if you're focusing on the terroir, when I say terroir, I mean, you know, provenance, the flavors of the barley, being able to taste the raw ingredients in the whiskey. If you want to taste, you know, the green kind of grassy flavor, you want to taste the, you know, the citrus notes from the grains, you want that malty sweetness, you cannot chill filter, because chill filtration is going to strip out all those elements. You know, there's a lot of fatty acids, a lot of esters, aldehydes, you know, congeners, different stuff that just basically gets, you know, brought down in temperature. It congeals, turns solid like, you know, olive oil in a refrigerator, and they just strip it out. You know, to me, if you're going to make a good whiskey, you better release 100% of that whiskey. You know, if you're going to make a good whiskey, why would you strip out, you know, the fat, really? Why would you take out the most flavorful elements of it? So we're passionate about the way we make whiskey, and you know, and making sure that there's no chill filtration, there's no caramel color. You know, in our mind, that's the authentic traditional way to make Scotch, and that's the best way to really kind of, you know, show off the flavors of the barley. But I mean, there are, like I said, business models that are just pumping out product, and it doesn't make any sense for them to look at chill filtration. And also, if they're using grain that was maybe grown for yield and not for flavor, and they're not focusing on the flavor of the barley, they're focusing more on the casks and the marketing behind the casks and the age of the whiskey and the impact that the barrels have on the whiskey, then yeah, chill filtration is not really something you need to look at. I mean, that's just, you know, my opinion. You know, like you said, it's a hot or cold topic, and the people that are very passionate about it, and there are plenty of people that just don't care, don't know what it is.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I've always been a fan of non-chill filtered stuff, and I think there's a huge difference, and I can taste the difference. And I'm not going to mention brands, but there have been other brands that I've had that went from non-chill filtered to chill filtered, and a huge difference in the flavor. And I agree with what you say 100%. But I'm glad to hear you say that, and you're sticking to the old ways.
And once you go to non-chill filtered, it's very hard to go back. I mean, to me, it's like going from Mount Jemima to real maple syrup. Once you've had a real maple syrup, you can't go back to the high fructose corn syrup and you know, food coloring.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
That said, like someone who's from Maine.
Chad?
So Bruichladdich has well over 50 different expressions in their archives. The newest being, gotta butcher this, the Ternary Project.
Ternary, yeah.
The Ternary Project, I apologize. Master distiller Adam Hennett says he crossed the boundaries of spirit types by combining 3 different single malts, with each component of each one complex in its own rights. The project is a blend of 3 different expressions: a single malt with French red wine and a PX finish by 30% of a blend, Port Charlotte heavily peated in a first fill bourbon cask, and a first fill Oloroso cask, and a first fill virgin oak cask, being a 40%. Mad scientists over there.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that one?
I have a couple bottles on their way from the distillery. This is another one-off. We cannot, unfortunately, can't expect to see this in stores. I think there's only 3,000 bottles released worldwide. It's an interesting concept. You get a little bit of Bruichladdich, you get a little bit of Port Charlotte, you get a little bit of Octomore in one bottle. Growing up, we'd go to Burger King. We call that a suicide when you hit every soda and you combine them all. That's kind of what Adam was doing there, mixing the three products or the three brands at Bruichladdich. I haven't tasted it yet, but you know, they're the yearly releases. I'm assuming this was the Fagile release. You know, I don't think that they're not. I think they're doing another digital or virtual festival this year, and I think this is the bottling surrounding it. But like I said, it's always a fact at Bruichladdich until it isn't. So who knows? They keep a lot of stuff close to the chest.
I actually pulled that information off of Bruichladdich website, and I thought it was interesting that they were adding all those different casks and Sauternes and Austrian sweet wine, ex-Amarone and bourbon casks, and coming out at 104.2 proof. It sounds like it's going to be a phenomenal whiskey, at least to try, because it has all that other influence in it. But you know, that was you already hit on it, that it sounds like it's a one-off, and that was just going to be the question: is it a one-off, or are they going to produce this?
Yeah, I mean, we had about 500 whiskeys in our portfolio for the first 10 years of the distillery being open. It was pretty crazy. I think there was 1 week in it was like 2009. There's 1 week in December. There was 19 whiskeys released by Bruichladdich. 19 different whiskeys in 1 week. And a lot of that comes from, again, 5,000 barrels and having to recast and find ways to, you know, to make money and to just keep the lights going. Another great way you can do that, by the way, is by making gin. You guys tried the Botanist gin. It's a fantastic gin made at Bruichladdich. Nice thing about gin is you make it 1 week, sell it the next week. No, don't have to wait for anything. Yeah, it got a little nutty with about 500 different whiskeys out there. People sort of like not being able to really identify the brand. Well, what is Bruichladdich? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? There's a peated Bruichladdich here. What is this rocks? What is this waves? Lynx? I don't know. So we kind of diluted the brand, and so we kind of did a reverse on that. We brought it down to just, okay, Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte, Octomore, and then within those there's subcategories. There's the classic, which is this always Scottish barley, which is the bottle you can pick this up and expect it to taste the same year in, year out. But again, to your point about different casks being used, I don't know if you guys know this, but the back of the bottle, there's a code where you can go on the website and you can plug that in and see all the barrels that are used to make this whiskey. So it's not like this is just one cask. There's 5 or 6 different barrels in here, and you can in each recipe, and you can look that up yourself. The bottle I have is 20-163. And if you go to you click into Classic Latte on the website, you'll see the transparency campaign, and you can pull up the exact recipe. So there's still a lot of different barrels going into the releases that we have. But those 3 brands with the Scottish barley and then the Isle of Barley vintage releases as subcategories within those brands. And then we started looking at the Bear Barley and the organic and doing some alternate like barley exploration, then alternate cask exploration. And then Pandora's box is open again, and suddenly now we're pumping out tons of one-offs. So who's to say we won't get it back up to a couple hundred whiskeys out there again? I might have to pull it back a little bit. But yeah, there's plenty of one-offs that you'll see throughout the year. I think the last year of the pandemic, things have slowed down a bit, and we've moved more towards different social or environmental initiatives, like becoming a registered B Corporation, and then launching again this transparency campaign. But yeah, you will see one-offs that you'll hear about online, and then you'll try to buy on the website, and then for the first like 10 minutes of it being open, and then it'll crash the website, and you won't see the whiskey. So it's a lot of that stuff.
I want to take you back for a minute to something you mentioned earlier, and that's terroir. And just for our viewers, I'd like you, if you will, to give a definition of what terroir is and how that involves the farms in Islay, and what the philosophy of Bruichladdich is to incorporate that into its whiskey production.
The film, Water of Life, really spotlighted that towards the end of the film, and I thought it was a really impressive section. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, when you said it's a hot or cold issue before, talking about chill filtration, I thought you were going to terroir, because that tends to really get a lot of whiskey feathers ruffled, especially in the Scotch world. But yeah, I mean, terroir is a French term. We talk about it all the time with wine. This sense of place typically is essentially what it means. That the elements in the environment, that the soil type, the proximity to the ocean, it could be the weather of that year, the humidity, all these different environmental aspects will affect the flavor of the wine, right? It affects the grapes, the harvest, and it's going to translate into some sort of flavor differences in the wine. That's widely accepted, and they actually kind of taken it a little bit further and in a little kind of woo-woo territory by saying, oh, the personality of the vinter and all these other different kind of elements of like the star charts of that year or that day is going to affect the wine as well. So that's an established kind of thought process. But when you're talking about distilled spirits, which have considerably more alcohol and considerably less room for other things, when you have wine, you're at 12 to 18% ABV. So there's lots of other flavor that can come from different elements in there. But with distilled spirits, there's less of that. But still, we've been talking about that in Scotch for a while, but we haven't really even realized we've been talking about it. I don't know about you, but I grew up hearing about the different regions, Speyside and Campbelltown and Islay and all these different types of whiskeys that are flavored differently or taste differently, but it's tied to where they're made. That's terroir. You could actually say it's more provenance, because terroir is something I'd probably want to get away from because that's tends to get a little woo-woo. I like provenance, really, when you think about champagne coming from the Champagne region of France, or cognac made in cognac, or tequila made in tequila. And then when mezcal started to get popular recently, it's another thing where people started talking more about provenance, talking about where the agaves are grown and how the flavor of either the mezcal or the tequila is influenced by the raw ingredients. So this is something that Mark and Simon, the two wine merchants that reopened Bruichladdich, it's something that was part of their day-to-day world in dealing with wine. And these old Bruichladdich that they tasted in the shop, to them had Islay terroir. It tasted like the place it came from. When I say it tastes like the place it comes from, if you go to Islay, you spend any amount of time on Islay, you're going to walk away from that smelling and tasting Islay. There's going to be salt on your skin, salt on your lips, like you've been out on a boat all day. It really kind of sticks to you. And that's the way we want the whiskey to taste. We want the whiskey to taste like it's born on Islay, it's been aged on Islay, it's breathed, the casks have breathed in the air, around Port Charlotte, close to the ocean. We want that salinity in the whiskey. And then when you start looking at growing grains on Islay, which for whiskey production hadn't been done really, as far as we know, ever. No one's grown barley on Islay to make whiskey, and they stopped growing barley for cattle in the mid 20th century because the commodity market, stuff being grown in Russia, India, Czech Republic, it basically just put everyone out of business. So when you're talking about Scotch whiskey, the only rules are that it must be made from barley. It doesn't say where the barley has to come from. So a lot of it comes from Russia, India, Czech Republic, like I said, to make Scotch whiskey using Russian barley. There's no real talk or no real thought at all to the provenance of the grains. So for Jim to really focus on this kind of ground up approach, literally ground up, talking about the grains, and then working with local farmers to get them to grow barley again on Islay for the first time in 80 years. And then to grow barley with the distillation in mind was something that was pretty new, pretty revolutionary. And it's definitely translated in the whiskeys. If you taste a bottle of classic Lottie, this is about 200 farms in there, all from the Highlands. And that's all around Baird's, our malting facility out there. That tastes incredibly different from, say, I don't know, the 2007 Rockside, which Greg and I were talking about a couple of days back, which was a single vintage, single estate whiskey distilled from grains at just one farm, Rockside Farm. And that is a farm on the northwest coast of Islay, right up against the water. And you can taste the salt. You can taste this kind of fresh, wild spicy, almost kind of like a rye-like character to it, but with this salinity that it might come from the casks, but I would say it probably comes from the barley growing up right by the water. So different grains, different varietals, different locations, quality of harvest, whether it's a good year for the harvest or a bad year. Like grapes, barley tends to taste better when it has to fight for its life, when it has to really kind of work harder. Terroir and provenance is something that we're just starting to really kind of understand and accept, but there's so much that can come out of that in terms of flavor that we're really just starting to explore more with. I hope that I explained it. It's a tough nut to crack, and
it did. And from the film, I got a lot of the different soil made different flavors in the barley, and there's just so much about the provenance, as you put it, where it's grown, how it's harvested, how it's been located as far as being near the water. It makes such a difference in the end product.
Yeah, to your point there about the soil impacting the flavor. I don't remember if you talked about this in the movie, but there's an experiment going on where they've planted the same barley varietal, and I think there's 5 different locations, the 4 compass points of Scotland, and then Islay. Same barley varietal, and they're going to be distilled the same year, distilled the same way, same casks, basically keeping everything as constant as possible except for the location, and tasting these side by side just to kind of see what differences come about just from literally just geographical different location.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it definitely is. Greg, Alphonse, for those that are not in WBSA and have access to the codes, would you like to tell people where they could view the film?
Yeah, the people can go to our website, and there's a bunch of events. I will tell people, if they go based on this, if they're interested, they can go get a ticket to the film and watch it anytime they want this week. And then a week from today, we're doing an event with Adam Hannett, and that ticket would include free access to that event with Adam. So you could come actually have a Q&A with Adam as well. And that would be on our website at wateroflifefilm.com. I'll put it in the chat here. What's Alphonse? What is it? It's Bruichladdich Saturdays, right?
Yeah, partners/Saturdays.
Got it. There you go. It's in the chat, but I mean, and if you want to, if Tasha can share it out to the group, whatever, but it's the same thing that would be pinned on the post in the group. Okay. Yeah, we're doing lots of these events, and Bruichladdich been one of the things we've been doing. We did it with Lynn McEwen. Next week is Adam, and 2 weeks after that is with Simon Coughlin. So we're showing the film, and they're sharing people who are currently making the whiskey with us to sort of do Q&As, because we've done loads of things with Jim, but Jim is retired, and so we're actually now focusing on the people who make the stuff today.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Greg. Why should people watch the film?
Well, I think I'll tell you what. This is hard for me to say because I'm it's a love letter to whiskey, is what it is, and I hope it's educational and inspirational at the same time. I mean, that's what we set out to do. We unapologetically love whiskey. And we really thought this was a great way. One of the things I've always said from the beginning was I want to make a film that my mother-in-law would like, and she doesn't drink. And so there's a human story to it. There's an emotional story to it, but you kind of learn a lot about Scotland, about whiskey, about history at the same time. And I hope people, the reception we've gotten in the whiskey world has been absolutely amazing. I think that we're star-crossed, but we're a little blessed, because our original plan, of course, was to release this at whiskey and film festivals, but they don't exist right now. I always tell people we got into the Seattle Film Festival on a Monday, and Tuesday morning, the Seattle Film Festival got canceled. And that's just, that's the world for the last year, but that's how it impacted us. We were going to premiere this at Bruichladdich during last year's festival, and we had some really cool stuff planned. Alan Logan was exploring getting whiskey flavored popcorn made. But because we couldn't do that, what we've done is we've reached out to whiskey groups all over the world, whether it's online, like you guys, or just actual clubs that want to all get together, whether it's through a Zoom, or a couple have done it in person. and it's been amazing. I think it's actually been better for us because it's, you know, we're kind of talking to our tribe.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
hear.
I
Sorry.
thoroughly enjoyed the movie. It touched on, as you said, you know, history of whiskey, the personal side of the people behind the whiskey. It was a fantastic film. And I do encourage everybody to go up to the Penn Post and WBSC. Definitely, it's an hour and what, 25, 35 minutes. It's
An hour and 28
film.
minutes.
It's just a great film. I was engrossed in it this morning, well, a couple hours ago rather, and just it really puts you in Bruichladdich distillery, and you know, between the two guys on the dog walking on the barrels, to all the entertaining stories. So you know, Cinderella, it tells a story that you can make good choices when faced with tough circumstances and unfair treatment. And in the case of Bruichladdich Distillery, Cinderella finally made it to the ball. So I'd like to thank Jason, the Bruichladdich Brand Ambassador on the East Coast of the U.S., Greg Schwartz, the director, and Alphonse, the producer of A Water of Life. And Bill, Mindy, remember, WBSC, crack a bottle, share a pour. Cheers, everybody.
Lunch it up.
Cheers.
Lunch it
Thank
up.
you.